this is the second time I've caught this dude from the Daily Hive being super intelligent and having empathy and understanding for the neighborhood that I like to point out always. This is a high native neighborhood. You wouldn't get away with doing this in any big city unless it was already broken people. I can't believe nobody talks about the smell, okay? The smell is absolutely just horrific. It's a deadly smell. It makes us sick. And nobody mentions the smell. They do when we talk together, but they don't mention it in the media or any politician. Hey, it smells really bad. I'm not going to come to your neighborhood. You know, that's what I would fucking say. Okay, so the downtown east side, and we're by Chinatown. Poor Chinatown is suffering. The government's pouring funds and resources into the neighborhood, offering supply and shelter spaces. Well, that's one problem. You put them all in one spot down here, okay, where it's a high concentration of up to 40% natives. That's one big issue. And then you've made them second-class citizens, you know, outside my door to white privileged street poopers on hard drugs. There's no problem. This is a Canadian problem. This is Canada's problem. How do you explain the downtown east side to a child? Yeah. How do you explain that in a nation that's supposed to be a good nation? It's worse than third world countries. Pakistan told me they don't have any shit show like this anywhere in their country. They were shocked because, first of all, I got into a fight with them on Twitter because they were trying to tell me they're poor. They took a look at my videos and they were shocked. They no longer had any respect for Trudeau. I caught them on Twitter, on Trudeau page, you know, praising Trudeau. Oh boy. I wonder why I'm not on Twitter anymore. But anyway. So they have been suffering, the natives. And to put this into the native neighborhood, instead of anything healing, any signs that hard drug kills, how do you get people off hard drugs when they're in the middle of hard drugs and suffering in a shit show like this? It's going to be hard for them to be able to even tolerate it. Look at me. I'm on cannabis, and I can't get enough to go out there. It's such a shit show. My cupcakes don't make me mellow out there. Before, it always did. You have to be on guard. And you expect people to get off hard drugs and opiate in this fucking shit show? Then you bring in street poopers on hard drugs, some of them professional street poopers. And then you hire us, ex-street pooper Sarah Bly, to make everything worse. And she laughs and tells us to have a good day. And none of us are having a good day. I hope you guys take that sign down. That sign that makes the street poopers look like they own our streets. Welcome to downtown east side. Should be a fucking big danger sign. So, anyway. It's more accurate to say, yeah, it's inequality. Yeah. During the COVID, I know the billionaires got rich. I called it a big financial fucking heist. You know, from the poor and the middle class right to the big real wealthy. And this toxic smoking death, this is something I have just learned about because I had to witness it. One toke kills. This isn't fair for Chinatown. Chinatown should be valuable. It's been here for a long time. Now, where does he say that it's...
We invited trauma and addictions expert Dr. Gabor Mate to Daily Hive to talk about the housing crisis and Vancouver's downtown east side. Here's what he had to say. This past summer, there was a lot of reporting on tourists' reactions to the downtown east side and how it's scaring them away. And one outlet even published an article titled, How to Explain the Downtown East Side to a Tourist. And I think a more interesting question that I'd like to ask you, having moved here from Ottawa, how do you explain the downtown east side to children growing up in Vancouver?
Here's the thing. A friend of mine who's a Lakota origin American physician and psychiatrist says that in the Lakota tradition, when somebody gets sick, the community takes the attitude, thank you, your illness manifests some dysfunction about our whole community. So your healing is our healing. Now, there's no problem of the downtown east side. There's the problem of Canada. When I worked in the downtown east side, as I mentioned, 30% of my clients were First Nation. They didn't rise from the ground, sprouted from the downtown east side. They came from all the suffering communities throughout Canada that have been blighted by colonialism and sexual abuse and physical abuse at the hands of church authorities for over 100 years.
And foster care.
In a country where there's still racism, police violence against Indigenous people.
90% failure of foster
Where people
care.
grow up with no potable water in their communities. So how do you explain the downtown east side? You say that people who
That's
are
why I
suffering
insist this is racist,
come to a
what's
place
happening down
where they can do some drugs to soothe their pain, and where they can meet with others of their kind but don't feel so isolated. But it's not that the problem began in the downtown east side. It began from all these other places where they had to escape from. That's how I would explain it.
Having worked in the downtown east side for over a decade, do you feel like there's anything missing from our approach to treating those with substance addictions?
Missing? There's everything missing. I mean, the Vancouver downtown east side actually has more services than anywhere else in North America, and better services, but we're still having an epidemic of overdoses. More people die of overdose in this province than died of COVID, by far. And everybody's talking about COVID. Where's all the social concern about these deaths? Now, first of all, if we had any kind of a sane and science-based attitude towards drug addiction, we wouldn't outlaw the personal possession of drugs. You would make people out of criminals. Because why do people do drugs? Why do people do drugs? To soothe their pain.
Canada is now going to euthanize them
So
to soothe their
I
pain.
would say the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. So first of all, how do we help people heal from trauma? That's the question. And how do we not further traumatize them? Now, when somebody's really deeply traumatized and deep emotional and physical pain, especially emotional pain, then they use an opiate to soothe their pain, then you make them into a criminal, and you hurt them even more. So that first of all, you'd have to reform the laws. Then you'd have to reform the whole way we approach it. If somebody's hooked on heroin, the best thing to do is to give them heroin, so they don't have to go through terrible withdrawal, which makes them commit crimes against themselves and others, and makes them desperate to inject with all kinds of junk in the streets. We've only known this for decades. There's nothing new about this. The evidence is not even controversial. So then you help them rehabilitate, ideally to get off the heroin, but first you have to treat them with kindness and acceptance and meet them where they're at. And then you work to take them further.
We have no kindness.
So there needs to be a much more layered and nuanced, compassionate treatment approach. There needs to be a very different legal approach.
That's about it.
In Portugal, they've decriminalized the personal possession of drugs. They don't have more addiction than they used to. They have less. They have more people in treatment. And nobody goes to jail. Now, dealing, that's another thing. Nobody's advocating that it should be sold in the streets or in street corners. But we have so much science and evidence now that we could have a progressive and much more humane and much more rational approach. When the COVID crisis hit British Columbia, our health officer here, Bonnie Henry, shot to international fame because of her very calm and grounded and science-based approach to the COVID situation. Whether you agree with all of the policies or not, she really did do a stellar job in trying to contain the spread of the virus.
I hate her so much that I'm off this. Absolutely. I was ahead of Bonnie Henry through most of the COVID of her information. I investigated, and I now know they didn't have any scientists. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I have no respect for her. I shouldn't have been ahead of her. and still am.